Um, I'm going to do probably a little bit of a U-turn here to a methodology discussion. And I would challenge you all to think about some of our earlier discussions, our panels and our dives into physical science, and maybe use what I'm showing you here a little bit to pull in that multidisciplinary. So how could this apply? I may be stretching it a bit because I'm focused on what I see as a ongoing global war that is primarily being orchestrated from Russia against democratic societies, and we're all experiencing this. So but we talked a bit about that yesterday. So today I'm going to talk about how my company has evolved a framework to try to think comprehensively and in an integrated fashion about global change. So as we know, it's an incredibly complicated world, and I started this company with the idea that it's our responsibility to try to get our heads around how emerging change is impacting human security. So I actually recruited former colleagues. Actually, 3 are my former bosses from my career. 20 years in the Pentagon, 14 and a half years with the Director of National Intelligence. And during those 14 and a half years, I did 2 rotations to the State Department. One of my jobs from State Department Intelligence Research was managing the Global Futures Forum, which was 24 nations working together to try to think through how change should be demanding that we make better decisions to shape the future we want instead of just waiting till it smacked us in the face. And the genesis was that some of the CIA analysts who had to live through the whole 9/11 fiasco said, if we were doing a better job talking with our foreign partners and our friendly countries about radical Islamic extremism and what we could be doing to mitigate that threat, perhaps we would have understood it. Perhaps we would have done some things that could have prevented 9/11. So that was kind of why a couple years after 9/11, CIA analysts started putting together this program. And it's purely unclassified discussions. I'm giving you this context because it was a program that was then canceled in 2014. And I was managing at the time, but had a different boss who was like, we don't want to do this unclassified stuff. So that's the short story. But I left that position with a full heart of commitment to, we should be doing this work. We should be doing it with our international colleagues. We should be doing our best to point to decisions that could be made proactively to start shaping emerging trends the way we want them to be shaped. So this is our construct that we developed over the course of about a year. Of course, there are lots of ways to slice this, the world up, but I am working with some people who spent decades doing strategic foresight, who 9 of my advisors have PhDs. The rest of them all have multiple masters. They're spent career in intelligence and State Department. Michael is one of our advisors. And so we have a contingent of 6 international advisors, and the network is very open. The idea is just to bring together the right people to have a conversation about how all these different trends are playing out in a particular region of the world. So we try to focus in on reality, data, what's happening here, and then how are these things affecting each other. So if we're looking at pandemic resilience and there are massive disinformation campaigns to make people think that the vaccine's going to kill them, there's a real simple example of how disinformation and pandemic resilience are related to each other. So the integration point is critical. And this is just a, slide, right? But understanding how we could improve our discussions about the interactions and what they mean for the future, how they could play out in new disruptive ways that we're not anticipating. That is like at the heart of what we've been working on. And this is definitely a work in progress. We have a tool for this 12 trend model to work people through those relationships and document the rationale. So we develop spreadsheets of data about what people are thinking and why. So that's our starting point of like, how can we evolve from there and maybe pull in more and more rich data to support our understanding of the future. And that's one reason that Michael and Odessa and I connected last year, is this idea that there's data out there that can help us understand these trends. And like, let's make it as strong an argument as possible in order to influence decision making. Because ultimately, this is meant to be shared with senior policymakers and be a credible source of rationale for them making change. Any questions on that? So I decided to do Central and Eastern Europe first. And as I was having discussions with people in the region, I realized we're talking about a foresight process that is about 3 to 5 years out, which isn't super futuristic. It's meant to be fairly close in to affect decision processes. But when your house is on fire, you're not really going to want to talk about 3 to 5 years if your country's, in danger of disappearing. So I put together with my team a sort of a new way of looking at doing a foresight exercise that's crisis conflict focused. And so it would be a 6 to 24 month out in terms of what should we be doing to change the trajectory. This evolved into a set of 9 means that Russia is using against in different degrees. Primarily, this is the Ukraine maximum pressure strategy, but this could be applied to how Russia is sort of confronting the world, and Ukraine being the front line of that confrontation right now, but lots of issues around affecting global public opinion to undermine support for Ukraine, which we all are very aware of. So we took that longer term view, we kind of crunched it down. It's a little different way of framing it, but it's related. And the point is, how are these things working together and increasing the effect, the strategic impact that Russia is able to have. And if you're Vladimir Putin and you're orchestrating all these things and you are a strategist, I believe he's a very clever man and he has some very clever people working with him. And I believe they are pushing all the levers of their national power against the West with the intent of, we will crush Ukraine. So this is, in terms of the tool that supports this, we're kind of evolving it. We did a test case a few weeks ago to try to like see if we could nail down like how is electronic warfare, cyber warfare, and increased escalation of physical attacks, how are those things being orchestrated to have a stronger effect? We've seen sabotage of factories that are building munitions to resupply Ukraine. We've seen, people who are in the anti-corruption board in Ukraine be threatened. So there's lots of different pieces that are going on all at once. The color coding here is just to say we can see some of this. You'll see it on the news. You'll hear about the drone strikes. You'll hear what, Ukraine took out a Russian energy facility, I guess, last night. But and you see lots of Russian strikes and the physical damage to Russian or to Ukrainian society. But the color coding is it gets less and less visible to the outer world, and it gets harder to add up because the effects aren't immediate and they're not visible, and therefore they're difficult to measure. So, and I will take any attacks on this. This is something that I sort of, my brain evolved in the last couple weeks, is like, how do you think about like why it's so hard to understand this as a strategic war that Russia is executing against, any Ukraine and any of the countries in the West that support Ukraine. And then it's got its partners in China, Iran, and North Korea that we felt we consider those. That's the alliance of our enemies because it's authoritarian societies, right? So let me go. So the other thing, this relates to what I had just spoken to, is multiple. So single means are attacking multiple targets. So having, and I call it objectives, but these are also targets. What are they trying to achieve with these these tools? So for any military historians in the audience, the doctrinal thing in the military is massing of effects, and you try to mass effects against targets of your enemy, right? This is multiple means against multiple targets, and multiple targets being, sorry, I don't know how I'm saying this, and a large set of means. So it's not just firepower, right? It's a whole toolbox that's being applied against different objectives with sort of an exponential whole is greater of the sum of the parts outcome. So that's what I try to depict here, to try to think through, like, how would a tool allow us to argue for the strength of the Russian campaign and start seeing things that maybe we're not seeing, our political leaders aren't seeing, so they're not countering it. And at the same time help make the case that we have to do more for Ukraine than just send them stuff. Sending them stuff is critical, but there is a larger strategic campaign that we need to get on board and actually fight that war. And I don't think we're doing such a great job. And this another way of depicting how to think through, like, what is it that Russia's trying to do? So they're trying to degrade Ukrainian military capability, and they're using different tools. And this just allows us to see a little bit further into what specifically are they doing in these different areas, so we can have a little more precision about countering, identifying requirements, and then articulating the shortfalls to the international community. And this is kind of just a strategic planning process that happens in the Pentagon all the time, like with lots of different actors. But our thesis is we don't think it's happening that much on the frontline states. And I would love any feedback on that, in a systematic way that allows them to communicate. And so this brings all different areas of expertise together to think about what are the things that Russia is using to be successful, and then how do we get in the way of that and think creatively as a team of strategists. So this is basically just a quick framing of taking this larger idea that we should be doing foresight, bringing it forward into we should be doing foresight for some of these more urgent crisis situations. And what would that look like? How do you think through it systematically? Because so many tools are being brought to bear, and getting your head around that is difficult, and getting all the right people in the room is difficult. And I can share some of these slides for people to like say, oh, you forgot about this, or there's something else going on that maybe you didn't see. We're definitely, this is a collaborative process of getting better over time. Any questions? Good. Okay.
We can go a little bit into the breakout. So if we have our speakers for the next 2 sessions here until the end, so we can take, but quick.
No, I mean, it's kind of a comment. I mean, you have influence ops, but the whole aspect of conversation that we were having yesterday and today was also about societal cohesion. And I know if you go to like the UAE and you start looking at, we talk in dime fill in U.S. parlance, and there are elements of national power. They look at societal cohesion for obvious reasons. And I'm wondering if that's something that we maybe need to think about more in terms of the elements of national power, because it's very instrumental, but it doesn't look at some of these fundamental aspects. And maybe in some of our thinking, emphasizing that a little bit more, because it's definitely something that's a target. But how do we articulate that requirement in new and different ways is something I think is.
The targeted influence operations is meant to get at that, and it's a big title, but that's the underbelly, is like, what do we do to counter this polarization campaign that's.
So the industrial breakout is where Patty's going to be speaking. Industrial transition breakouts is the third one, so you can ask all your questions and continue the discussion there as well. Thank you so much, Patty. Thank you very much.